I have the key rack in the kitchen where I keep Carol's car keys and my car keys. And my husband had her grab it, just nobody grabbed it, let it pop the doors went up to realize it was Aaron's car keys, which does not have a house key. Oh. So I called my neighbor real quick. She said, yeah, I'm home. I'm Percy. No. Because not only did I don't have cars, I have a car. True. I'll go really straight. We can borrow one. Okay, I can say for I need to find food on the front porch. That will get done this weekend.
All right, the stream's going, so we should probably get started. Everything dictated by technology.
That's right.
Good. I gotta enable one of my mics isn't working. Always. Dun, dun, dun.
Slave machine, let's get it going.
Yeah, there it goes. All right. We're on the home stretch, folks. There's a better than average chance that we will talk about Constantine today, which means that we're there. But first, we're going to wrap up a little bit of talking about Christian culture towards the end, well, in this time period, right? So these first 3 centuries of Christianity. Where did we wrap up last week? I teased Galerius and the great persecution. We'll talk about that as well. I did not leave my notes up. Okay. Last week we wrapped up by talking about or teasing the great persecution to come. That takes us into the 4th century, in other words, the 300s. But I want to wrap up another couple of things about what Christianity looked like during this time period. Last week we talked about what Christian worship looked like. I guess we did the week before as well too. So again, centered around the 2 sacraments. Believe it or not all that dissimilar from what Christianity or Lutheranism looks like today. Worship was around the meal. The meal happened on Sunday morning. The first half of the service was readings, right? So they could be reading from the Torah, they could be reading from the works of the apostles, they could be reading stories of martyrs, right? And those readings would take up to 3 hours and even more. Oh my goodness, really? And then they'd share lunch, basically. But the only people that were allowed to participate in the meal were those who had been baptized. And of course, baptism was not a simple process. It could take also up to 3 years, right? So you would undergo examination, you would learn about the Christian faith, you would essentially be mentored by an elder in the church during that time period. Then everybody's baptized on Easter Vigil, right? Then you get to participate in the meal. The meal was a meal, right? So bread and wine were ritually shared, but the intent was that food would be shared with the community, and so that even extended to the community that wasn't there. So food was taken by the president, the presider, to the widows and the orphans in the community, and in that way, the whole community was fed by the meal. So we talked all about that a couple of weeks ago. Other interesting aspects of this is how was Christianity spread during this time, right? So the church is alive and active, undergoing temporary seasons of persecution depending on who's in power. How does Christianity grow? Okay, not in the way that we think. So they were not sending people into far off places to bring religiosity to the fuzzy wuzzies, so to speak. Movie line, never mind. Right? But it wasn't missionary work as the modern church, well, I should say the church after and colonialism tends to think of it. In fact, the missionary work of the Christian church was, in terms of spreading Christianity, relatively passive, right? they allowed the curiosity of others to come to them. One of the things that we have talked about, at length is that the primary population that was, Christian was blue-collar, lower classes, right? And so Christianity was spread via word of mouth, right? Christianity was spread in the workplace and in the home, but there wasn't necessarily a concerted effort to send somebody to a place to quote-unquote convert people. It didn't really happen in that way. And there is good reason for this, right? Especially in the periods where even holding a Christian faith might get you imprisoned or killed. The idea of sending a designated person to convert others to Christianity probably would not have been super successful or a super popular role at that, So missionary methods of the church were primarily concerned with supporting the community that existed and doing what they do, right? Now, what's interesting is that you will get Christians who are in Philippi, and then a family of them moves to, I don't know, pick an ancient city, right? Tarsus. And suddenly, there are Christians in Tarsus, right? That's how that worked. And so what would happen then is they would, essentially create, as a community of Christians arose in an area, they would, find each other, worship together, and then inevitably draw others into their worship practices. But again, it was natural human movement, not intentional, kind of colonial missionary methods. Does that make sense? Yeah, but he wasn't planting churches, right? And this is, we talked about this when we were talking about the apostles, is that Paul was visiting communities that already existed in a lot of ways, right? And he was visiting Jewish communities. So in some ways, Paul at times was, what we might refer to as evangelizing, right? So Paul was lauding the benefits of following Jesus, but when Paul's operating, it's still a Jewish reform movement, or essentially as Romans would be a Jewish cult. It hasn't yet become this other thing, right? But Paul, again, one of the things I said when we were studying Paul, or when we were studying the apostles, Paul was more of an administrator. Well, administrator is still the wrong word. Paul's primary interest was addressing conflicts within Christian communities and helping to clarify theological issues, right? He wasn't planting churches the way we think of it, right? And
so when you read these stories about, this might be moving forward too much, but say like St. Patrick going from England to Ireland, converting the people there.
Yeah.
Is that part of the era? Is that the...
Not so much. Not during this time period, right? So that kind of missionary work does happen, but it's very much in a post-Constantine church, right? Which Constantine turns Byzantium into Constantinople. Constantine turns Christianity, not single-handedly, into something very different. And that's attributing way more agency to Constantine than in terms of the transformation of Christianity. But there's a reason that Justo Gonzalez breaks this into two parts, right? Which is the church pre-Constantine and the church post-Constantine, is because it marks a big, big cultural shift, which has as much to do with the fact that suddenly Christianity is no longer restricted to the lower classes and has to be hidden. Now you can be a fully accepted member of society in all of its strati, or stratuses, all of its levels, right? And all of its levels, and not have to worry about it. So that, in fact, one of the lines that Gonzalez ends the section we're in right now with is he asks the question of whether Christianity will survive living in comfort. Right? That's really a profound question, and he means it too, because we'll get to that. I'm not jumping ahead of myself. But again, there's not a lot here, and the thing that I think is really informative to me is just what mission even meant And of course, they're not using, it's a different word, different language, but what this concept even meant in that early church. And one of the conversations, we can talk about this today, but what I want to get to, especially next week, and if depending on if we wrap up next week, is talking about how an understanding of what the early church looks like, how and does that affect how we view the church in the 21st century in all of its diversity, right? Are there things that we've lost? What's different? And in some ways, it's tempting to say that first 300 years of Christianity was Christianity the way that it should be, right? Which doesn't really work, right? Christianity during those 300 years was very unique to the context in which it existed. However, are there things that we've departed from over 2,000 years, right, to be fair, that might be worth re-examining, right? The way in which our congregations and our institutions function. Did we miss something? Do we lose something, right? Or even not even talking about it in that language, is there something that we can learn from our ancestors, 2,000 years ago? That's where my brain is going.
Well, and the other thought in the way my brain is going when you say that is Christianity during that period was a growth process.
Yeah.
And we have spun off over the centuries to so many different directions. What do you call Christianity?
Yeah. That's a valid. That's kind of the question. That's kind of the question, isn't it? Yeah. Christianity.
I haven't been here for a few weeks.
I know, vacation takers. I'm sorry, trip takers. You're tired.
We're tripping.
We be tripping.
I think, underestimate the role of the household in these first, I don't know how long, but at least pre-Constantine. Households were Jewish households, meaning if the father was Jewish, when he said, as for me and my house, he meant as for me and my house.
And it wasn't just his atomic family, his nuclear family.
No,
it was the attached.
Servants, his employees, as well as his servants. So his household is to govern. And it's difficult for us, I think, to move from there to almost anywhere else, because the word oikoumene, it means household, right? And you can individually differ from your dad in some things, but not much. There's just not a way to talk about the extreme paternalism unless you look at what are now called extreme cults, like fundamentalist Mormons.
Yeah.
Or Jehovah's Witnesses. Those are all patriarchal households.
Yeah.
So when you say passivity, I think it's important to say not very passive in the household. Okay? And the transformation just in my lifetime, what my father thought of as his household, and my generation, plus your generation, or any generation after you, is incredibly profound.
Yeah.
And I think we miss the mode of transmission of the faith if we don't just consider that as the sine qua non. Without that, nothing else exists.
Yeah.
Well, is that? I'm a little confused here because
Go.
First off, you said when we're talking about pre-Constantinople.
Yeah.
Number one, it was spread on lower class.
Yeah.
Maybe you were patriarchal, but they weren't these big, wealthy families. And also, it was pretty clear that women have a bigger role.
Yes.
Early in the church, prior to.
Yeah. Okay.
And the question I had is, you think it was successful in growing because of the Holy Spirit and because of Christ, but what social economic factors do you think might have also contributed to it?
This is great. The reason I make that side comment is that this fits in well with what we're going to talk about in the sermon as well today too, which is the significance of the economic divide and how that affected Christianity and continues to as well. In 2023, right, we have, how do I say this? Portland, urban area, right? Levels of religiosity, 20%, optimistically. Drive 2 hours east, right? Go to any rural area, and you're going to see that number go higher. One of the markers of whether or not you are religious in the United States of America has a lot to do with the amount of money you make, right? That's not to say that there aren't wealthy people that are religious and vice versa, right? But that was very true of Christianity during this expansion. I mean, here's part of the reason is that, okay, so it spreads amongst the lower classes. The narrative of the Christian message has to do a lot with good news to the poor, release the captives, caring for the widows and the orphans and the foreigner, right? Which is not just Jesus, that is the Jewish narrative as well too. One of the things that we lose out on so much is the heavy Levitical emphasis on care for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, right? Okay. The nature of that narrative, the nature of that message resonates 100% with those who are not in the elite, right? And over those 300 years where you have these cycles of, depending on who's in power, that religion might be actively suppressed by the elite, okay, those in power. It reinforces that, well, this is something that is counter-empire, right? And that language has been flung about a lot in our current big church conversation, which is good. I'm not poo-pooing it, but not empire as a concept, but literally, the empire. So counter-empire, right? So, and these, by the way, these are my opinions. This is what I think is going on. I think Christianity is popular because it says something that is different than the cultural norm, right? And it speaks good news to the people that I'd be curious. Gonzalez doesn't talk a lot about it, and maybe this data doesn't exist, but I would be curious to learn whether Christianity, whether blue collar, whether lower class, and whether there's a Venn diagram where lower class and specific cultural identities overlap. In other words, how do I get this? Judaism is spread via Jews moving other places, right? Jews are seen as a separate cultural identity throughout those 300 years of the Roman Empire, right? Christians initially are Jews that are following a different practice. By the time you get to the 3rd and 4th centuries, Christianity has spread significantly further, and so it has, again, gone to the Gentiles that we talk about. But what I would be really curious to know is that, does the Christian identity become a cultural one in addition to a religious one? I don't know.
I don't have any of the data anymore, and it's a little dated, but right at around where we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think it's post-Constantine. One of the big weird things is that people of some economic wealth happen to become Christian.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay. And they're like, we're going to all get rid of slavery right now.
Yeah.
So they do that for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it's like, wait, we need slavery again because, we're not getting a bunch of the wealth.
Because it's not economically convenient.
Yeah. So that we've had a couple of moves
movements within Christianity of dumping the slaves because of that, and then rethinking it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was inconvenient from an economic perspective. Just I'll quote some statistics at you. So year 100, right? So we're going back to the spread of Christianity again. So year 100, so we're going backing up 150 years. Urban areas, 64% of port cities, urban areas in the Roman Empire had a church, a Christian church. 64%, right? So Christianity had spread to via shipping lanes to 64% of the empire, or urban cities. 24% of the inland cities had a Christian church, right? So you can literally trace the path of the expansion of Christianity via trade, right? So where people moved to, okay? And arguably the transmission of information as well, too, right? Okay, that's 100, okay? By 180, so almost a century later, 86% of port cities and 65% of inland cities have churches, right? So you can, I mean, I don't care this, you can almost draw it as an infection path, right? It's literally viral, right? To use, I mean, well, not literally, it's figuratively viral. I gotta watch my language there. But I mean, the way in which we use outbreak spreads to map other concepts, you know, I mean, viral has become a metaphor for a reason, right? And so you can, I mean, Jackie and Dennis, I think you were looking at these maps before Adult Ed. Yeah, you can draw. I'm sure somebody's done it, but I would love to see like a videogram of like, you know, watching the spread of Christianity as the numbers grow, and it starts around the Mediterranean and slowly matriculates out into the countryside. But one of the things that's really important is again, the divide in those days is the reverse of today, which was Christianity was primarily in urban areas, not in rural, right? So the word pagan didn't mean those who aren't religious, it meant hillbillies, right? Pagan becomes synonymous with unreligious in Christian circles because of that correlation between Christianity primarily existed in urban areas, had not penetrated into rural areas, right? But keep in mind that urban areas in the ancient world are similar and different from urban areas in the modern world. And Portland is a bad example of this because Portland has a fixed urban growth boundary. It costs money to live in Portland, right? The people who are working our quote-unquote blue-collar jobs don't own houses, you know, in the downtown. And so the further out from an urban area like Portland, the more quote-unquote conservative or religious you get, right? The reverse is sort of true in ancient times. But, you know, cities in those days are, you've got a city center, but then your urban area is much. People live close to the cities because that's where the work is, right? That's where things happen. But you don't have highways that connect these routes in the same way that we do. So you can't live in Gresham and work in Portland in ancient Rome, right? You have neighborhood centers in a way like Paris, you know, modern Paris does, and you know, ancient Paris did, which is, you know, the arrondissements, so the different areas that all, you know, feed back, and those are urban areas. So, you know, again, it's not. To make a long story short, there are tons of poor and working class people in urban areas in the first 3 centuries of Christianity, right? And in fact, you could argue that that's primarily where the poor and working class go to, because they don't own land, right? Rural areas aren't rural in the way we think of it now, right? If you're a farmer, you are a property owner, unless you're working for a property owner, right? So, you know, imagine the Roman villas, that type of thing, which is hilarious. When we get to this, there's a great end of the 3rd century, beginning of the 4th century, a guy named, I was just reading all this morning. Diocletian, there we go. a guy named Diocletian takes over. Okay, Diocletian is successful. So the reign under Diocletian, end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th century, it's peaceful, it's prosperous, the Roman Empire is doing well. One of the reasons it's doing well is that Diocletian has revamped Roman leadership. So instead of just one guy, there are 4 guys. It's the tetrarchy. So there are 2 senior emperors and 2 junior emperors. There's the 2 Augustuses and the 2 Caesars. Diocletian is the Augustus that's in charge of the east of the Roman Empire, and he is also the one that is by default the chief boss, right? So any decision is going to default to Diocletian at the end of the day. He is still the emperor, but there's a total of 4 emperors that help manage the sprawling empire that Rome has become, right? One of the other guys, which is his junior, so he's the Caesar, is a guy named Galerius, okay? Galerius is a jerk. Straight up. This is one thing that all of the Christian historians can agree on. Eusebius, and there's another guy named Lactocian or something like that. They agree that Galerius is a jerk because for whatever reason, Galerius has it out for Christians. One of the theories is Galerius is a military man, right? Galerius, like the emperors before him, who engaged in persecution, was really interested in returning the glory of Rome, right? Which meant going back to the old gods, going back to the old ways, kind of this, this language that, we hear from time to time as well, too. Galerius has an incident where one of his armies, which is patrolling up the Danube River, has a bunch of Christians in it. And for whatever reason, those Christians decide that they're going to leave the army. We have no idea why. Well, you can't have that, right? That's bad for morale. So what Galerius does is he orders them all to be executed, okay? And what this leads Galerius to believe is that Christians can't be trusted. Here's the fascinating thing. Diocletian, the guy in charge, his wife and his daughter are both Christians. So you talk about family. It's gotten complicated by the 4th century because what has happened is due to about 50 years of relative lack of persecution, Christianity has become more normal. So normal, in fact, that the ruling emperor's family are Christians. Galerius, probably aware of this, right? Aware of this weakness in Diocletian's family, starts whispering in Diocletian's ear and telling Diocletian all the things that he needs to do and how much of a risk the Christians are to the empire. If we can't trust Christians as soldiers, what can we trust them with? And so over time what happens is that Galerius convinces Diocletian to do more and more and more until finally what happens is Diocletian gets sick, right? He doesn't die, but he's no longer capable of essentially managing the matters of state. Galerius is elevated to Emperor Augustus, right? Galerius is not satisfied with the tetrarchy. He would like to be dude in chief, right? Galerius sees a pathway to this, which is reigniting persecution of the Christians as one of those things. Because he's convinced that the armies will support him in this. After all, the Christians, according to his narrative, are a threat to the armies, right? So he demands that all Christians be expelled from military service. You can't serve in the army anymore. And over an increasing level of stuff, he essentially arrives at the point of outward and extreme persecution. It's the worst it's ever been. There's a reason they call this the Great Persecution. So you can't be Christian. You can't practice Christianity. You are required to make sacrifice to the temple. If you don't make sacrifice to the temple, you're arrested, tortured, and forced to recant. If you don't recant, you're executed. And there's none of this lion's pit stuff. He's just putting people on he's just crucifying folks. Like, straight up, if they won't work with us, we got to get rid of them, right? What's fascinating is if you read the pathway to this, right? It doesn't happen overnight. After all, Galerius is one guy in 4 realms, essentially, okay? And he is trying to convince the rest of the empire to go in line with this. And what he starts out, the language that he starts out with is, we can't trust them in the military. How can we trust them with our finances, right? And I'm paraphrasing quite a bit here, but it's eerily similar to the language that you see in the Third Reich leading up to the persecution and eventually extermination of the Jews. Is you can see the propaganda that Galerius uses, right, of othering the Christians. And again, the complicating factor is that we've got mixed families now in elite circles, right? And I think Paul is definitely right in that, the typical household, as you understand, household is a lot more conformative than this. But in elite families now, you have mixed families of Christians and non-Christians. Constantine himself is a mixed family. It's a different story. Okay, so what eventually happens is Galerius tries to take power, and he sort of succeeds. He subverts the tetrarchy, he kicks out or kills the others, puts his own puppets in place, and the two that are left are Galerius, who is Emperor Augustus of the East, and a guy named Constantinius, the father of Constantine, in the West, okay? And then Galerius installs two of his puppets as the Emperor Caesar, the junior, the vice emperors. Okay. But here's what happens, is that Constantinius continues to hold sway in the West. And Constantinius is not of a like mind with Galerius, and frankly is afraid of him, because he sees where this is going, right? There were 4. Galerius wants there to be 1. And so what this does is it essentially creates a divide, okay? To the point where Galerius is holding Constantine, who is Constantinius' son, essentially captive in Rome, right? He can't leave. Constantinius, who gets sick and is dying, finally convinces Galerius to let Constantine go with him to spend his final days, and then we never see Constantine back in Rome again for a long time. So essentially what happens is Constantine goes and sets up camp in Britain and Gaul, so, Western Europe, okay? And guess what? The armies love Constantine. They love him, love him. For whatever reason. He is young, he's charismatic, he puts on a good show, he's a great rhetorician, he loves to throw big parties, like all the things, I suppose, that soldiers love, Constantine does. And so what's happening is while Galerius is trying to stamp out pockets of Christianity and trying to, rule with an iron fist, here's Constantine that's slowly rallying the empire, the Roman armies to his cause, right? Galerius sees where this is going. One of the things that Constantine is also doing is he is advocating for tolerance with regards to Christianity and is beginning to draw this public persona of him as the defender of Christians, right? He himself is not Christian. He worships Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, okay? But he's arguing that he should be seen as the defender of Christians. I mean, this is a great propaganda campaign. Dude, he's smart. He knows how to win over people. Galerius freaks out because he sees where this is going. If he doesn't have control of the armies, he doesn't have anything. So what does he do? He goes and talks to Diocletian, who's still alive. He basically says to Diocletian, you need to step back in and support me. And you know what Diocletian says? He says, I'm happy farming cabbages, thank you very much. Because this is the segue tangent. Because Diocletian is a property owner living on his villa in the middle of wherever, enjoying rural life, right? As a contrast to everyone. Sorry, we transitioned out of our content. So let me finish the story. So Constantine gains power until eventually we see what's going to happen. At the same time, Galerius gets sick. So Galerius gets deathly ill, and he issues an edict. And 5 days before he dies, he issues an edict of tolerance, which I'll read for us here in a second, essentially declaring that, I'm sorry I was wrong. Listen to this, okay. April 30th, 311, Galerius proclaims, with all the laws which we have decreed for the good of the state, we have sought to restore the ancient rules and traditional discipline of the Romans. We have particularly sought to have Christians who had abandoned the faith of their ancestors. Notice that language, abandoned the faith of their ancestors. Why? Because they were following Christianity, not Roman religion. We have particularly saw that Christians who had abandoned the faith of their ancestors return to the truth. After the promulgation of our edict ordering all to return to the ancient customs, many obeyed for fear of danger. I wonder why that would be, Galerius. And we were forced to punish others. Nothing changes. No ownership, no taking of responsibility for the violence that he's ordered done. We were forced to punish others. But there are still many who persist on their opinions, and we are aware that they neither worship nor serve the gods, nor even their own God. Therefore, moved by our mercy to be benevolent toward all, it has seemed just to us to extend to them our pardon. He's using the royal we, by the way, okay? And allow them to be Christians once again. To allow them to be Christians once again. And once again, gather in their assemblies as long as they do not interfere with the public order. Notice, oh man. In another edict, we shall instruct the magistrates regarding this matter. In other words, he has declared it as emperor. He'll inform his underlings of this tolerance eventually, right? It's not happening now. In return for our tolerance, Christians will be required to pray to their God for us. Not for Rome, for him specifically. He's using the royal we here. For the public good and for themselves, so that the state may enjoy prosperity and they may live in peace. 5 days later, he dies. Okay? And there's a great quote from one of the, I think it might have been Eusebius again, or maybe it was Lactantius, who vehemently argues that there's no way that Galerius was forgiven by God. He claims that his conversion was far too late and that he is suffering eternal punishment in hell for his actions. They were very clear on that matter. So Galerius dies. There's a huge leadership void into which 4 new contenders step, Constantine being one of them, okay? Constantine, and we're fast forwarding a little bit here because it's politically interesting, but in terms of like actually talking about Christianity, not all that relevant. But this is what I get kicked out. The 4 guys that take over are Licinius, Maximinus Daia, Constantine, and Maxentius. And what's confusing about it is, I think it's Maxentius is the son of Maximinus, not Maximinus Daia. So it's this, there's so many Maxes in this world. So these 4 guys take over in the wake of Galerius' death. And then what happens is that Constantine slowly begins to accrue more power. The 3 of them gang, so Licinius, Maximinus Daia, and Constantine gang up on Maxentius. They kick him out. He gets murdered. not long after that. So then there were 3, and then Licinius and Maximinus Daia are fighting against each other. Constantine kind of gangs up. He is friends would be a strong word, but he kind of sides with Maximinus Daia, but eventually Maximinus Daia loses out, and then there were 2, so there's Constantine and Licinius. Here's the catch, is that Constantine's sister is married to Licinius. Yeah. And what's fascinating is if you watch the slow progress of Constantine's takeover of the Roman Empire, it takes about 20 years. So he starts in like 309 or maybe even earlier than that. But he doesn't gain the empire in full until like 324, and then he dies a year later or something like that. Like he does, or no, 10 years later. 330s is when he dies. But what the story that we know is when he rallies his armies to go take on, I think it was Maxentius. That makes sense, maybe. Maxentius, one of the Maxes. And what happens is, again, he has put himself out there as not the defender of Christianity, but the defender of Christians, okay? And he rallies his armies to march on Rome, which is where one of the Maxes' headquarters are. Maximinus or Maxentius, doesn't matter. It does matter, but I don't remember, so it doesn't matter. Consults the oracle, right? As a good Roman would do, consults the oracle and asks, what should I do? The oracle tells him he should rally his armies and go out to fight Constantine instead of hunkering down in Rome, which would have been the smart decision because there's no way Constantine was going to take Rome. So he marches his armies out. And this is where Constantine has his vision, right? Supposedly. supposedly has a vision. If you ask a Christian historian what happens, they'll tell you that, well, God appears to Constantine and convinces him. Here's one of the hugely common misconceptions, is that he doesn't put a cross on his shield, okay? He puts a Cairo on it, right? Which is the earliest, one of the earliest, the ichthys, the fish is the earliest Christian symbol, but this is one of the ones. And there's debate over what he thought he was doing, right? Because we attribute meaning to this because these are the first two letters in the name of Christ, right? I mean, there's no CH in Christ in Greek, right? It's Christus. Is that what Constantine thought he was doing? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what he does, and that's called his, not labellum, it's labarm, his sigil. His labarm, that's what he puts on his shield. And eventually, this sigil becomes synonymous with Constantine. People know him by his labarm and fear it. And at some point, Gonzalez, he kind of breaks it down and asks the question, was Constantine a Christian, right? In other words, did he convert to Christianity? And the answer is sort of. He never converts, okay? Because how do you convert? You get baptized. He gets baptized on his deathbed, okay? So he doesn't undergo the year to 3 years of preparation. He has Christians who are part of his staff, right? In fact, he's got a pocket bishop that goes around with him, right? I'm not joking. He literally has a pocket bishop that goes around with him and consults with him on matters. One of the things that Gonzalez argues is that Constantine didn't believe in the power of Christianity, but he believed in the power of the Christian God. So when he puts this symbol on his shield, it's not because he supports the ideas of Christianity, but it's that he believes that the Christian God is powerful, okay? And so when he instructs his soldiers to put this labarm on their shields, the assumption is that the Christian God, he is wielding the power of the Christian God against his foes. And so the final showdown between Constantine and Licinius never even happens. There's escalation until, and again, Licinius is married to Constantine's sister. And what happens is Constantine creates an incident where it's so great. He arrests a relative of Licinius and accuses him of conspiring against Constantine to murder him, right? Which, come on. We know, we've seen this movie before, right? Like, he creates this opportunity. And so Licinius, so he arrests this guy. Licinius, he doesn't arrest him. The guy flees to Licinius. Constantine sends a messenger to Licinius and says, you have to return the conspirator to me so that I may execute him, and Licinius refuses. Escalation until Licinius finally sees the writing on the wall and gets the heck out of Dodge, and then is murdered not too long after it, and Constantine's sister is now a widow. After that, Constantine then essentially controls the Roman Empire as it extends from Britain all the way through Turkey into Asia Minor, right? Yeah. So we're at Constantine. What time is it? Oh, 10:30. I got 15 minutes yet. Woo! Yeah, that's a lot of history. Well, my watch is okay. Yeah, that one is definitely off. Okay. What do you think?
I think for me, I have to simplify things to make sense of them. To me, this triad of love and justice and power are always in play. They're always in an imbalance and balance with each other. I don't know if they've ever been balanced, but the reason I like that triad is because it's so descriptive of these, not just this period, but every period of history that we're aware of. Asking how do those interrelate? Which is the most
you brought up so many issues of what does it mean to be, again, the patriarch, the one in authority, the one with the power to not just put people to death, but give them life through feeding them. I mean, you talk about how Constantine rallied his troops. It was food.
Yeah.
He fed those
Yeah.
guys, right? And made sure that their bellies were full. And that was a powerful thing. It was a just thing, it was a loving thing. But they all totally interrelate. So how does Christianity affect the politics as you go along? And to me, what comes in here, again, there's a male-female component that's really critical to me, because as far as I know, we don't get a lot of stories of, maybe they're just suppressed in history. We don't get a lot of stories of female power. So that this corrupted vision of power for males means you've got to be hilarious, you've got to be Hitler, you've got to be Trump, you've got to be Pol Pot, you've got to be whoever, right? And that's always in play. And we seduce ourselves into thinking, as again, our hippie side would, it's all about love, man. Yeah, no, it isn't. It's about these things and how disciplined we are in keeping them together. So it just seems to me that Christianity is, the history is kind of miraculous to me, that love actually, conquers all in the end, in the narrative.
Yeah.
As resurrection says it will, right?
Yeah.
But how does it all interrelate with each other? Then bring the female thing back in. Why is Mary so absolutely crucial to Christianity in a way that Protestants have no sense of?
No concept of.
But she is absolutely critical to the story.
Yeah.
Not just as mommy.
Yeah.
But as, I mean, when the Roman Church goes Queen of Heaven, they're going, there is this component of justice that has to be always gentle and kind and nurturing and compassionate. Yeah, and I don't know if you get that without Mary.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus, if you look at the face of Jesus on the basilica near my son's house in D.C., the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, Jesus, that's the angriest Jesus I have ever seen. God, that's a terrible icon to have in the dome, right?
Yeah.
And yet, you talk about Constantine wanting to use the power.
Yeah.
His Jesus is that Jesus.
Yeah.
Mary. Ooh, you keep her away from me.
Yeah.
So these things are, in this 2,000-year drama that just never quits, right? And I don't know what we're going to do with it in the future right now. I look at this and say, it's this interrelationship that's being played out, right?
Yeah.
And whether you're idealistic and want one of those to be over the other, it's not possible. They're always in play with each other, and you just wonderfully described how they've been interacting, right? With power being the primary thing, because without that, the love and justice don't matter. Without justice, love, and power don't matter. They all matter together. They all matter together.
Yeah.
So, what's God up to? I don't know. But it has to do with that. It has to do with that constantly.
Was Mary brought in to juxtaposition
Yeah.
of those?
Yeah. Well, and juxtaposition against the imagery that Paul describes of Christ the powerful, church triumphant, Christ victorious.
It's the Hitler pose.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's the thing. My opinion is that Constantine is the best thing that ever happened for Christians during his time period. and one of the worst things that ever happened to Christianity. Because again, what Constantine, okay, again, I'll read you this Gonzalez quote before we take off today. Prior to Constantine's victory over, Rome, again, we've described what Christianity looks like. It is a religion that exists as good news for people who don't get a lot of good news, right? So, again, the working class, the soldier, I would argue, right? Again, that the soldier becomes front and center to the conflict that eventually results in Constantine, winning his battle. But and suddenly, not overnight, over the reign of an emperor, and then the successive transformation of the church, Christ becomes not the God to those folks, but becomes the God that you put on a shield against your enemies. And we will never lose that, right? Because you fast forward through the next 1,700 years of history, and Christ becomes the God of the Crusades, right? Christ becomes the God who sends missionaries to convert the heathens, right? Christ is the totem, right? Is the totem of power that we continue to hold up, right? In God we trust. God's on our side, right? And so, this is the thing, we can never erase it. We can never erase it. It's always going to exist in our collective consciousness. So like earlier, Jill made a comment about how we have Christianities, right? It's very true, right? 2023. Here's okay, 1040. Here's the interesting thing. So talking about the contrast between the masculine and the feminine is Constantine's mom, right? Saint Helena, who is the namesake of my wife. So Santa Helena is Saint Helena, or Saint Helen, the namesake of our volcano nearby. Yeah. But what does Helena do? Right? So as Constantine is wielding Christ as a totem in his victory over his enemies, Helena goes to the Holy Land to try and find out the particularities of this Jesus person, right? I don't claim, we don't know much about Helena outside of that, right? She's an emperor's mom. She's a woman in the ancient world. I don't know if she was a nice lady or not. But again, contrasting the masculine with the feminine, what's she interested in? She's interested in the story. She's interested in the narrative. She's interested in where Jesus was born and where Jesus died, because those are the things that are important to her, contrasted with Constantine, who sees Christ as a means to an end and the power that he can use to wield against it. So even this awful thing that happened, there's that aspect to it as well too. And what Paul's naming too is that you can track over history where the church, the big C church, has gone towards power, right, or towards justice, or towards love. We swing. I think that's a great image. Where the emphasis of the church goes in either direction, and you will always find counterexamples of that, right? You will find those that are that don't fall in line with that, right? So like during one of the most violent periods of the history of the church, during the Crusades, you also get the rise of monasticism, right? You get during the persecution of many Christians by Christians over theological imagery, you get the rise of the cult of Mary, right? That comes out as a counterpoint to what's going on. So, in this way, this is where it's helpful for me to talk about what's God up to, right? What's going on here, right? When the church itself becomes a persecutor of Christians, of Christ, what is God doing, Okay, let me read this quote from, because I think this is okay. So, what just happened in the narrative is that there's the Edict of Milan, okay, which follows Licinius surrendering to Constantine. So the Edict of Milan is argued as kind of the end, the official full stop end to the persecution of Christians, okay? Sort of. Truth is a little bit more complicated, but that's the official end of it. So Here's what Gonzalez writes to close out the section. Whether this was in truth a victory, referring to the Edict of Milan, or the beginning of new and perhaps greater difficulties, will be the theme of many chapters to follow. So he's introducing now history from Constantine to the Reformation. Whatever the case may be, there is no doubt that the conversion of Constantine had enormous consequences for Christianity, which was forced to face new questions. What would happen when those who called themselves servants of a carpenter, and whose great heroes were fisherfolk, slaves, and criminals condemned to death by the state, suddenly saw themselves surrounded by imperial pomp and power? Would they remain firm in their faith, or would it be those who had stood firm before tortures and before beasts would give way to the temptations of an easy life and social prestige?
That is with the exercise of power oppressing a majority.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I've always found that thought by Gonzalez to be really profound in thinking about, and a very for me relevant question for today, right? Is Christianity the Christianity that whose heroes are carpenters, fisherfolk, and the oppressed, or are our heroes the ones who carry the cross on a shield to smite our foes?
Well, or, just, I'm going to get killed by you guys.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't very seductive, but a Christian
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's, what will seduce you.
Yeah. This is great. We got through Constantine today. So next week is going to be the last session on this stuff, and then in Advent I'll do something different. I haven't made my mind yet. So next week I want to do some decompression or a debrief, which is go over these 300 years of Christian history and kind of talk about the thought questions that we're talking about today, which is, what do we find inspirational? What do we find challenging? What do we find informative about what those 300 years of Christian history look like? And what does it have to do with today, right? Where do we see that stuff echo today? Yeah. Thanks, folks. Thank you for a wonderful conversation today. I will see you all in church. Well, we're in church, in worship.
Leave the tables and chairs or feel free to leave them out.
So easy.
We used to. Marker's walking off.
Sorry, I didn't want to keep you up. Yeah.